Racing might just be one of the oldest competitions in human history. The statement, "Hey, I bet I can do this faster than you," can be applied to just about anything. So it's really no wonder that racing has become such a popular genre of video games. But what happens when you thrust that genre into the whimsical world of super mushrooms and power stars? How do you stuff some of gaming's biggest mascots into go-karts while still preserving the unique personality that made them popular in the first place? Hi there, my name is Daniel, and I think Super Mario Kart is pretty creative. Fun fact, I'm actually not that into racing games. I've never been much of a car enthusiast, and I don't really have the reflexes to keep up with the fast-paced gameplay. Oddly enough, however, I am very into Mario Kart. I've played just about every game in the series to death, and I can trace some of my fondest childhood memories back to barreling down DK Mountain and bouncing through a massive pinball machine. Ironically though, the one game in the series I've never experienced is the very first one. It was a bit before my time, and I always just assumed it was obsolete compared to later titles. But this game was quite the visionary for its time. F-Zero had been released a year prior and was one of the first games to extensively utilize the Super Nintendo's Mode 7 graphic capabilities, which allowed backgrounds to be scaled and rotated to create the impression of depth. And while it's certainly not easy on the eyes by today's standards, it was a precursor to 3D that breathed new life into the racing genre. But F-Zero was a single-player experience, and the boys at Nintendo EAD knew they could do more, which is why their next project was kicked off with the goal of creating a party racer that players could easily approach and enjoy with friends. And thus, Super Mario Kart was born. F-Zero's high-intensity hover cars were switched out for more approachable go-karts, which were driven by the easily recognizable Mario cast. And even the course design was simplified for the sake of split-screen visibility, a commitment that runs so deep the screen is always split, with single-player using literally half of its real estate to display a detailed map. You're right, Nintendo, I didn't really need to see the race anyway. But while this heads-up display would see some pretty big changes later on, our menus and modes should feel mostly familiar for you series veterans out there. We're given the choice of several speed options, with 150cc actually being locked behind 100 this time. No mirror mode yet, guys. Time trials are here too, but there's also this strange 1v1 mode called Match Race, which would eventually grow into the beefier Versus Race in later titles. And I can't forget about the legendary Battle mode, although it is limited to just 2-player balloon battles for now. This additional mode has never been the meat of the Mario Kart experience, but I appreciate how it provides an alternative to racing that still capitalizes on the series' token chaotic gameplay. I won't really be focusing on it for the sake of this discussion, but hey, it's there. Before choosing our track, however, we gotta decide who's sitting behind the wheel. Super Mario Kart features 8 playable characters, most of which are obvious choices like Peach, Yoshi, and oh yeah, Mario. But bringing it back to Jumpman's roots, we've also got Donkey Kong Jr., seeing as DK's more recognizable appearance wouldn't come for a couple years. And while this may seem like a pretty typical roster for a Mario game, I am genuinely impressed with how diverse and expressive this cast of characters turned out to be. The bros are your all-arounders, clocking in with mid-range stats in each category. The dragon and the lady, as the game calls them, have great acceleration but struggle around curves. Then there's Bowser and DK Jr., our resident heavyweights, who understandably knock the other racers around but also rock the highest top speed in the cast. And finally, we've got the small guys, who trade that top speed and weight for solid acceleration and handling. Great for breaking away from the pack, but you're going to want to steer clear from the heavier folks. Finding a playstyle that works for you is huge, because this game is not messing around. Seriously, I'd consider myself a relatively experienced Mario Kart player, and I suck at this game. The controls are super touchy, with the slightest misstep setting off a chain reaction that lands you out of bounds. And this isn't Mario Kart 8, where Lakitu actually values your time. No, if you fall off, you might as well take a break and go get a snack. And then there's drifting. You know, that classic Mario Kart power slide that preserves your speed around turns? Yeah, well, forget everything you know about it. There are no mini turbos to build up to, and drifting is so slippery in this game that simply relying on the power slide alone will often leave you flying into the ether. I typically found that following my drifts with another hop or two was the best way to reset my momentum, and there were times where I needed to just let off the gas entirely to maintain control of the kart. These punishing mechanics honestly reminded me of 200cc in 8, because at no point could I just go full speed ahead and drift my way into victory. Rather, I was forced to consciously rotate through my toolkit of techniques in order to keep up. And while that's certainly challenging and required a lot of practice, I actually found it surprisingly engaging and enjoyable once I got the hang of it. But then you drive over one of these guys, and this is where the game really becomes Mario Kart. Snagging an item box will grant you one of these power-ups, and like later Mario Karts, the quality of power-ups has an inverse relationship with your position. There are also these coins scattered all over the track, and if you're familiar with their function in 7 and 8, they play a pretty similar role here, slightly increasing your top speed the more you collect. But you also might have noticed the absence of series staples like bob-ombs and spiny shells, which amounts to much less chaos in each race. Heck, computer players can't even throw items like red shells in this game, although interestingly, they do have their own exclusive items that you can't get, which they will snipe you with. Super Mario Kart just feels less reliant on power-ups in general than later series titles. Sure, they enhance the gameplay and might give you a leg up at times, but they'll hardly ever win the race for you. I'm looking at you, Bullet Bill. If you win, it's because you've outraced your opponents with your own skill. And if you lose, which was way more often for me, you probably just need more practice. Your own skill level isn't the only thing to worry about, however, because you've also got to contend with the courses themselves. Getting to experience a new lineup of imaginative tracks has become one of my favorite parts of any new Mario Kart title. But in Super Mario Kart, the team took a relatively conservative approach to the game's courses. As to be expected, we've got 4 cups to choose from, each progressively more difficult than the last. But this first go-around, Nintendo filled each one with 5 stages instead of 4. Rather than creating unique designs for each individual track, however, this game gives us 7 course themes, 8 if you count Rainbow Road, each of which features its own specific terrain and obstacles. Now, it might be tempting to think of this lineup as inherently less creative than later entries, but this was their first try. And from a design standpoint, I really appreciate how each theme feels simple, yet totally at home in the Mushroom Kingdom. This system of course archetypes is similar to how worlds in a Mario game contain many iterations on a similar set of ideas, and it also allows for increasing complexity without throwing too many new mechanics at players. But I gotta be honest, some of these courses have not aged well at all. Nintendo has gotten really good over the years at creating inspired spaces that intuitively challenge players, and in this first title, that balance between creativity and accessibility just wasn't quite calibrated yet. A lot of stages felt more like obstacle courses than actual racetracks, which is never more apparent than in tracks like Choco Island and Vanilla Lake. I mean, these are literally just circles, and when played with the cleaned up mechanics of later games, they're really not that hard. But it's the punishing controls, the intense terrain physics, and the dizzying visuals that really make these tightly packed stages a challenge to navigate. Take Rainbow Road as another example, which deceivingly has one of the simplest looking maps in the entire game. But between the narrow paths around these super thwomps and the complete lack of any sort of guardrail, my actual time with the course was not fun. Trust me. I am all about a solid challenge, but some of these difficult stages just felt like I was fighting against the game rather than mastering it. Ironically, my favorite tracks in the game were the more generic Mario Circuit courses. With no real gimmicks to speak of, these basic stages rely instead on making the tracks themselves more interesting with each successive entry. This is just good old-fashioned racing, and it's in these moments that the core gameplay of Super Mario Kart really shines. Every classic has to start somewhere, and with the titan of gaming Mario Kart has become, it's impressive to return to its roots and see just how simple the series began. Super Mario Kart has all the core elements that make these games great. They're just a little rough around the edges. And while some of the course designs haven't aged that well as a result, I actually found it refreshing to return to the stripped-down racing mechanics of this game. It may not be the first Mario Kart I return to, but it will always stand for me as an ambitious forerunner that gave us the series we know and love today. Mario Kart may have inspired a number of Mario sports games and other Mascot racers, but this first entry illustrates that a solid idea doesn't have to be fully fleshed out on the first try. And isn't that such a relief? I can tend to put so much pressure on myself when it comes to my work. I feel like if I don't finish a project with absolute perfection, it's not going to be good enough for me or anyone else. Heck, I even struggled with that while writing this script. But nothing I create will ever be perfect. And I want to pause today and remember that who I am isn't defined by the quality of my work. And for the rest of you friends, I want you to know that you are loved, you are valuable, and you are creative. God bless y'all. Have a great day.